Hi there and good evening. You're watching India Tonight with me, Ruchi Bhatia. We've got a power-packed show lined up for you over the next 60 minutes. So let's get started with an ET Now news break. With a rise in corporate frauds and misappropriation of funds, the role of independent directors is on the radar of the Corporate Affairs Ministry. Sources tell ET Now that the government is looking to propose a dual voting system, a system that is prevalent in countries like United Kingdom, to get the independent directors on board for any firm. Remember, the role of independent directors has been under question, whether or not the independent directors are truly independent and what can be done to give the independent directors more transparency and more power. The move is likely to give more power to minority shareholders, as dual voting system will enable a separate minority shareholder voting after the voting by all shareholders, including the promoters, is done. Remember, a big issue that is often raised is whether promoters play a large role in selection of these independent directors. And that is something that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is looking at tweaking. They believe this is an idea whose time has come, and perhaps there is a need to give more power to the minority shareholders. In fact, the move is aimed at calibrating the balance between promoters and minority shareholders, giving them some sort of a space to express their concerns, if there are any, with respect to the appointment of an independent director. And if the minority shareholders are not okay with the appointment of a particular independent directors, then a period of 3 months or 90 days will be given so that the company can rethink on their decision to get that particular person. As I told you, the aim is to recalibrate the role of promoters as well as minority shareholders, and the Ministry of Corporate Affairs will be deliberating this move in detail before the changes are made. MCA plans to safeguard the rights of minority shareholders, empower them, and that is exactly what we will be discussing this evening on the big story that we are tracking here on India Tonight.
The most important thing is that whatever method of selection you appoint or you adopt, ultimately it depends upon the character of the individual. Whatever process of election you have, if the individual is of a high character, whether he is appointed by the promoter or minority shareholder, he will behave in the manner which is expected. In order to go to a transparent system, you should first have more number of candidates than the position. That is first. The second is that NRC should have a transparent process by which they are recommending it.
The clampdown on corporate frauds and the role of independent directors is something that we're discussing here this evening on India Tonight. Let's discuss this story further. Joining us now is Prabal Basu Roy, Management Advisor and former corporate director as well. Mr. Roy, thanks for taking your time out and speaking to us at ET Now. We're given to understand that the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is proposing a dual voting system for appointing independent director, a system that is prevalent in countries like UK. How effective will be a move like this to recalibrate the balance between promoters and minority shareholders in the light of many corporate governance lapses that we're seeing lately?
Ruchi, you know, I have written about this in the past as well, and I've lobbied for this. The point is, this is a step in the right direction. But whether this will stem the problem or not, I'm not sure. And let's just understand why. Because the primary problem in the Indian corporate sector and the way the boards are run is an issue of the character trait of independence. That is the basic issue. And in that sort of situation, you know, I've argued that legislating your way out of a character trait is very, very difficult. Having said that, I mean, what are the options the government had? So in the current circumstances, I think the very fact that we are giving an option to minority shareholders to actually reject independent director effectively, because the promoter will still bring the independent director to the table. He'll still in that way appoint, but the final appointment will have to be validated by the minority shareholders. So this fear of rejection will, of course, put some brakes on the unfettered friends and family type of independent directors who populate most of the Indian boards. So that part is a step in the right direction. But the larger issue is, of course, one of this independence as a character trait, which is sadly missing, as we have seen in many cases. I can't say in all cases, but in most cases.
Absolutely. Mr. Roy, you're talking about how a character trait of independence is an issue. But, if you look at the way things are done currently the appointment of independent director happens via the nomination and the remunerative committee, the NRC, that identifies the candidate. Then a resolution needs about 50% of the votes that are cast. But most Indian companies are promoter-driven. The fear is that, there is going to be a large influence of promoters, and that is exactly what dilutes the entire process. Would you at least say that such a step will empower the minority shareholders moderately, which so far had very little voice? And at least, will also ensure that there is moral pressure of sorts on the promoter to hear the voices of minority shareholders?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, that's what I said. And in the current circumstances, the government has very little choices. So this is a step in the right direction, undoubtedly. And the fact that a minority independent director, after having been appointed by the majority shareholders or the promoters, can actually be rejected by the minority group, is a good enough sort of breaks, or good enough thing which can put a break on this system of getting friends and family, etc., on the board. And the best thing would be, of course, we must understand that this will work only with companies which have a lot of institutional holding. Disparate minority shareholders still obviously will not have a voice enough, but it opens up a window for shareholder activism through the institutional investor route, and that is very encouraging.
Prabal, when I was talking to the Corporate Affairs Ministry, they believe that this is an idea whose time has come. But would you say corporate India is open to, such ideas, such changes, if they were to come? Because we're given to understand that deliberations are yet to happen on this issue. It is something that's still at a very nascent stage, but they believe perhaps the time is right.
Well, the time obviously has come. We are already late in the game. In fact, way back in 2009, when the Satyam scandal broke out, I had written an article called "More Satyams Will Continue to Happen," and unfortunately, I'd argued why it will happen. It's a very larger issue. Not only this, there's a larger issue to that. So 10 years down the road, you have seen the Fortises and UBs and all of that of the world happening. So the time is definitely there. The question is, will corporate India accept it? Like in everything, we have a HDFC, we have a Wipro, we have Infosys, we have examples of all these very good corporations, which are run, even without this legislation, is run very well, right? Even though there are promoters and groups of promoters and so on and so forth. So it is the intent of the promoter which is important here. So that will change gradually. I'm sure it will change gradually. And legislation is a very good way of, sort of bringing about that change and generally pushing in that direction. But yes, it won't come all that easily for most of the companies. That's a fact. But over time, it will work out, I'm sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Prabal, I was speaking to Mr. J.N. Gupta in the morning, and he was pointing out how there are issues with respect to independent directors that are far deeper. He was saying that the current process is fine as long as, we have more candidates than the positions that are available, and ensure that retail investors too participate in voting. Would you agree to something like that?
Yes, absolutely. I would agree to that. I mean, retail investors, frankly, either don't have the wherewithal or the understanding of what goes on in corporate boards to actually make an effective vote. So that's why I said this window will help us change through the institutional investor route. So those companies which have large institutional holdings will be the first beneficiaries of this sort of rule. But that's a good change to start. That's a good way to start. Of course, the issues are far, far deeper, and I don't think in a small TV program we can sort of discuss the entire issues of what sort of goes on in boards and why the corporate boards fail in stopping frauds and so on and so forth. But as I've argued earlier, since you've raised the point, it's in effect the entire thing can work not only because of the boards, but because of the conglomeration of the CFO and the CEO from the management team, the audit committee, the auditors, and finally the board. All four have to work in unison, and that is where it goes wrong for many reasons. And I've also argued that the CFO definitely needs to have more accountability in terms of even liabilities under law if certain things are misrepresented to the audit committee and the auditors and so on and so forth. So it's a much larger issue. It's a much larger issue about corporate failures. But as far as this specific one is concerned, I think it's a step in the right direction.
Right. On that note, Prabal, many thanks for taking your time out, speaking to us on that very important subject. Always a pleasure getting your perspective.